October the 2nd. The train, with a long and shuddering sigh, departed into the fog, leaving me alone on the rain-glossed platform of a place that felt more forgotten than abandoned, as if its very name had slipped from the world's memory and now clung only to this coastline like mildew on damp stone. The sign above the station bore half-erased letters, cracked and blistered by salt and time Dunmere, perhaps, though even that seemed more like a suggestion than a certainty. A sound one might overhear in a dream or glimpse scrawled in the margins of an old sailor's map. The sea stretched beyond it, grey and endless, heaving slowly under the weight of clouds that never broke but only thickened, pressing down upon the crooked silhouette of the town below. I had not come here with hope. Hope had died somewhere along the railway line, discarded between towns, left behind like the life I once led. What I brought instead was purpose, cold, quiet, and resolute. There were things I needed to forget, thoughts that no longer felt safe to carry, and truths that refused to remain buried. I sought no redemption, only obscurity. And in this place, I sensed I might finally disappear into the folds of damp mist and sea rust. A man in a long coat, face hidden beneath a sodden cap, gestured me toward Anne in atop a crag near the southern wharf. He said nothing, but the angle of his nod was enough. The tavern above which I would rent my room appeared as though grown from the rock itself, its walls bowed and greenish with age, glistening where the rain seeped through the salt-swollen wood. The veranda, long and uneven, looked out toward the restless ocean, and it was there, on that warped perch above the surf, that I now sit, writing these lines with fingers stiff from the cold and the air thick with the scent of fish, algae, and something faintly metallic that stirs an unease I cannot quite explain. Inside, the innkeeper had handed me a key without asking my name, and I offered payment without speaking. Our silence was a kind of pact, and it seemed the house itself approved, groaning softly as I stepped through its narrow halls. My room is modest, a bed, a desk, a single bulb casting a jaundiced glow, yet even here, I feel the breath of the sea pressing through the walls, as though the building were not a shelter from it, but part of it. This place is not merely coastal, it is possessed by the ocean. Every surface is touched by damp, every corner bears the scent of rot, and even the shadows seem to pool with something briny and unclean. As I sit beneath the dim light, I feel the faint tremor of waves far below, as if something vast moves in the deeps, and each surge of tide is its turning. I tell myself these are only impressions, tricks of fatigue and storm. Yet some part of me, the same part that fled the city and its terrible conclusions, knows better. October the 3rd. Rain has not ceased, though it changes in character. Now a fine mist, now a steady curtain, now a whisper like breath against the glass. I walked through the town this morning, drawn by a need to map its shape, though each alley in turn seemed designed to elude memory. The streets are crooked and narrow, their stones slick with algae, and the buildings lean toward one another, like conspirators in some wordless pact. Those few I passed on the road gave me neither greeting nor glance. Their faces pale, water-worn, and marked by generations of salt and silence, bore the same expressionless hush as the town itself. There is a language here, but it is not spoken aloud. It dwells in the lean of eaves, the slump of roofs, and the low humming that seems to rise from the very earth. Just beneath the threshold of hearing, I found no church bells, only a blackened steeple above a shuttered hall, whose windows were sealed with tar and driftwood. Its door bore no symbol. only deep gouges that may have once formed an image, now lost to erosion or deliberate defacement. At its steps, an old man sat with a net in his lap, his eyes milky and unblinking as I passed, though his fingers never ceased their slow, deliberate knotting. I asked once, only once, about a library. The grocer, a man with a beard like wet rope and eyes like shale, replied without looking up, saying simply, "We don't keep books anymore." Whether this was fact or warning, I could not say. In a narrow alley, I caught sight of a boy, perhaps 10 years old, watching me with an intensity far too old for his face. He raised his hand in greeting, or perhaps in warning, and I saw that his fingers were webbed with something that was not quite skin. Before I could speak, he vanished into the shadows. It is not merely isolation that haunts this place. It is suggestion. Every corner seems to offer a shape just beyond certainty. Every sound half reminds you of something forgotten. The mind, when presented with absence and fog, begins to fill in the gaps, but what it fills them with here is not its own invention. There is something inherent to this place, a consciousness, maybe, or a history that never ended. I cannot yet tell if I've stumbled into it by accident, or if I was, in some unknowable way, drawn. The night is restless. Beneath the floorboards of the tavern, there are sounds, soft and methodical, like slow, steady tapping on wet wood, always just beyond rhythm, never quite repeating. The mirror in my room reflects the window even when it is shrouded, and the angle seems wrong. I have begun covering it each night I should leave. Any sane man would, but I do not, because I sense that the path I began elsewhere has led me here, and that beneath the strange geometry of this town, beneath its tides and boarded windows, lies the answer to something I had once believed unanswerable. This place, for all its ruin and silence, is speaking, and I intend to listen. October the 4th. I dreamt last night, if what visited me can be called a dream, that I stood upon a vast stretch of salt-slick stone beneath an ochre sky, where the ocean withdrew into the dark like breath, drawn through clenched teeth. Towers rose in the surf, not built but grown, crooked as barnacles and laced with coral-like veins through old flesh. And something watched me from the tide, not with malice, but with expectation. When I awoke, I could not remember leaving my bed, yet the soles of my feet were wet with brine, and my window, which I keep locked, hung open, the curtains twisted as though caught in a slow, deliberate wind. The mist had thickened by morning, crawling inland with a sentient sluggishness, and the entire town had taken on the hue of old paper, yellowed and forgotten. I could see only a few feet ahead as I walked, but I found myself drawn toward the docks, guided not by desire, but by an almost magnetic certainty, as if something beneath the town called gently upward, luring not with voice, but with gravity. The wharf, if it was ever meant for ships, seems now to serve another purpose. No vessels were moored there, though the waterline was marked with ropes and chains so encrusted they might have anchored sea monsters rather than boats. The planks of the dock were green with age, and thick with a strange slickness I dared not test with my bare hand. Sea-pale fungi clung to the pilings, and between them I glimpsed what I first mistook for eelgrass, but quickly recognized as eyes, small, lidless, and fixed upward from the black water. They swayed gently with the tide, never blinking, as if the bay itself watched my approach. No one else was there. No fishermen, no workers, no idle loiterers. And yet I did not feel alone. The fog parted briefly to reveal a structure further out. A shack or watch house balanced on stilts above the bay's surface. It was connected to the wharf by a thin, rotting walkway, its slats warped like teeth in a decaying jaw. I crossed it without truly choosing to, my steps guided by something deeper than will. And as I reached the door, I felt a pulse, not within me, but in the wood beneath my feet, a slow, rhythmic thrum, like the breathing of something submerged. The door was not locked inside. The room was dark, though the air carried the same electric temps that precedes a storm. Nets hung from the ceiling like shrouds, tangled and damp. On the far wall, an altar of sorts, fashioned from driftwood and bone, bore carvings too eroded to decipher. But above it, suspended by rusted hooks, was something that turned my stomach. A bell, long and narrow, made not of metal but of shell, lacquered with some varnish that gleamed like oil. It was covered in symbols, not written, but grown into the surface, like barnacles spelling forgotten names. And though no wind blew, it swayed. October 5th. I returned to the boarding house in a fog of my own, unable to recall the walk back. My clothes were damp again, not from rain, but from sea spray, though I do not remember any surf. The tavern was empty, as always, the innkeeper invisible, the silence oppressive. That night, I did not write. I watched Dot from the veranda. The fog no longer seemed a product of weather, but of the sea's will, flowing not with the wind, but with intention. Shapes moved within it, vague, hunched, and slow, as though old things had begun to stir in the streets after dark. I heard no footsteps, only the wet brush of limbs against cobblestone and the creak of old wood responding to a weight long absent at one point. I thought I saw someone or something pass beneath the veranda, a tall figure cloaked in sea-wet cloth, its gait irregular, its direction uncertain. But when I leaned forward, it was gone, and then came the knocking. Not upon my door, nor from the hallway, but beneath the floorboards. A slow, deliberate tap, like knuckles rapping on the underside of a coffin lid. 3 times, then silence, then again, and again, measured. Patient, I did not sleep. I waited. October the 6th. It is clear now that this place resists chronology. Time here moves not forward, but sideways, in spirals. I have taken to marking the hours by the tide, though even that has begun to seem uncertain. Some days the sea retreats as expected. Others, it presses against the town long past what should be the turning. Today I returned to the shack. The path was dry, though the sky threatened rain. Inside, the bell remained as I left it, still swaying, still silent. I found a book on the floor beneath the altar, its cover swollen and green, its pages damp but intact. It contains no words, only illustrations, line drawings of things with too many limbs, cities beneath waves, and rituals performed in silhouette. One image shows the town itself, unmistakably, but the houses are twisted, sunken, half consumed by coral and vine. And above it all, rising from the sea, is a shape that cannot be measured. A tower, a mouth, a blossom, I cannot say, but it sees that much is certain. I took the book with me. October 7th. Last night, the knocking returned. But this time, it was not alone. Between the raps, which still came in threes, I heard whispers, low and wet, like breath exhaled through gills. The words were not in any language I know, and yet they reached me, stirring something old and terrified in the marrow of my bones. I dreamt again, or perhaps I woke into a dream, and stood once more upon that black shore, where the sky bleeds green and the sea recedes forever. The towers had multiplied. and on the beach stood figures robed in seaweed, their faces hidden, their arms raised, not in praise, but in command. The bell rang, not once, but endlessly, though no hand touched it, and beneath the surface of that retreating ocean, something vast and coiled opened an eye. When I awoke, the book lay open beside me, turned to a page I had not yet reached. The drawing showed a man, faceless, writing at a desk, a lamp glowing at his side, while behind him, beyond the window, something enormous watched from the sea. I do not remember drawing it. October the 8th. Today, the fog arrived before dawn, and did not lift. It presses against the windows, now like some pale sea creature, formless, persistent, alive. The veranda has disappeared entirely into it, and even the sound of the waves has diminished, muffled as though the town rests now beneath a bell jar, sealed and waiting. I find I can no longer tell where the mist ends and my thoughts begin. I stayed indoors through the morning, attempting to study the strange book I recovered from the shack, though its images seemed to shift subtly from day to day, or from hour to hour. Some pages now depict symbols I do not recall, as though the act of looking draws new ink to the surface. One image, which I am certain was blank before now, shows a half-submerged structure, a kind of temple or monolith, its entrance framed by tendrils or roots or tentacles. There are no figures drawn near it, and yet I feel certain that something waits just beyond the threshold. Motionless, watching the reader through the page, I am less afraid than I should be. That is what troubles me most. October the 9th. A woman came to the tavern today, the first soul I have spoken to in this place who did not immediately turn away. She was older, with hair the color of smoke and skin that looked as though it had been carved from driftwood. She carried a basket of dried herbs, or perhaps seaweed, and asked the innkeeper no questions when she entered. Instead, she turned to me, fixed me with eyes as pale as glass, and said, "The tide will not recede tonight." She sat across from me without invitation. Her presence was not comforting, but it brought a strange stillness, like the quiet between waves. When I asked what she meant, she ignored the question and reached into her basket, producing a small object wrapped in oilskin. It was a charm or a fetish, bound with twine and adorned with fragments of bone and shell. She placed it gently on the table before me. "You've brought something with you," she said, her voice low and without inflection. "It isn't yours, but it recognizes you." I asked her who she was. She replied simply, "I remember." Then she stood and left, vanishing into the fog as if swallowed. The charm remains beside me as I write. I have not touched it. October the 10th. The knocking did not come last night. In its absence, I found myself listening for it more intently than ever. The silence was not peace, it was waiting, like breath held beneath the surface. When I slept, I did not dream. Or rather, the dream was a void, a grey chamber in which I simply waited, seated at the same desk, with the sea roaring far above me as if I were buried in stone. I awoke feeling not refreshed but unsealed, like something within me had been opened and quietly rearranged. I resolved to leave the boarding house today, if only to remember what solid ground feels like. The air outside was dense with mist, but my legs carried me along the southern path that winds beside the estuary, a path I had not noticed before, though I must have passed it many times. It led me to a house, not abandoned, though surely uninhabited, by any ordinary definition. The shutters hung askew, the chimney long crumbled, and yet the door stood closed and intact, painted a pale, sickly green that seemed untouched by time. I knocked. There was no answer, and yet the door opened with the lightest push. Inside, I found dust, thick and undisturbed, but no cobwebs. The furniture was modest. The walls hung with faded paintings of maritime scenes, storms, drownings, and what looked like rituals conducted on rocky shores. In one, a group of robed figures stood in a circle, their heads bowed, while a dark shape rose from the surf beyond. In another, the very house I now stood in was depicted, though with one impossible detail. Above it hung a twin moon, larger than it should have been, and red as blood in water. On a table near the hearth lay a journal, not unlike my own. The ink was brown and stiff with age, but I read enough to understand its purpose. It belonged to a man unnamed, who had also come to Dunmere, seeking isolation. His entries were scattered, erratic, growing less coherent with each page. One passage chilled me enough that I transcribe it here in full. I was not wrong. The dreams are not mine. They are memories, not of this life, not of this world, but of the deep. They call it the threshold beneath the tide, and when it opens, the town will kneel. October the 11th. The charm has changed. It now bears a mark I do not remember, a spiral carved into the bone, so precise and symmetrical that no hand could have made it casually. It seems to pulse when I look too long at it. I have not dreamed since I brought it inside, but I hear sounds again, not the knocking, nor the whispering, but a new rhythm, like a slow chant at the edge of hearing, sung in a language older than breath. It comes from the sea. I do not know how I know this, but I do. It comes from beneath. I feel as though I am no longer reading the book I took from the shack, but translating it as if the drawings and symbols are speaking to some part of me, long buried, coaxing it into motion. I write words I do not understand, into my own margins. October the 12th. I remained inside today, not from fear, though there is always that, a cold weight now nestled somewhere behind my sternum, but from an inward pull, a gravitational sense that something beneath the surface of consciousness is preparing to breach. The charm on my desk vibrated gently without motion, and the book has begun to emit a faint smell, not unpleasant, but disturbingly familiar. Wet stone, iron, and something sweet, like lilies, left too long in water. I feel as though I've begun to live through the book rather than with it. The drawings are no longer illustrations. They are diagrams, instructions, perhaps. There is one page I cannot stop returning to, a spiral staircase descending into black water, ringed with glyphs I can now almost pronounce aloud. I do not know what it is that waits at the bottom, but I have the sense that it watches upward, that it too studies the page through some mirror of ink and breath. I did not eat today. I do not remember hunger. October the 13th. The tide did not come in last night, or perhaps it did, silently, without motion. When I looked from the veranda at dawn, the sea was impossibly still, its surface unbroken even by wind, and yet the town had changed. Not outwardly, no, the streets remained. The chimneys puffed their slow fish oil smoke. The windows of the houses watched with their usual blank regard, but the light had shifted. Everything now bears the tone of old bruises, grey, purple, yellow at the edges. The shadows fall in the wrong directions. Time here no longer flows, it seeps. At midday, I saw a procession. 5 figures walked the main road, not in a line, but in a spiral, slowly tightening their movement toward the old church on the rise. They were barefoot, they carried nothing. Their faces were veiled in seaweed and gauze. I watched them pass beneath my window without so much as a glance toward me. When they vanished into the church, I felt a pressure ease behind my eyes, as though their presence had been a frequency only my bones could hear. October the 14th. I returned to the house by the estuary. It had changed, not its location or form, but its age. The ivy that had once climbed its eaves had withered and blackened. The furniture within bore no dust now, only moisture, as though it had just been vacated. The hearth was warm. I found fish scales in the sink, but it was not the signs of occupation that disturbed me. It was the journal, the one I had taken, the same I now keep hidden in the drawer of my writing desk. Lay open again upon the table, exactly as I found it days ago. The ink on its pages was fresh, glistening, and a new entry had been added. Dated tomorrow, it reads, "He has returned. The eyes in the water know him. Soon he will descend, and the boundary will open again, as it did before." There was no signature. I left without touching anything else. But as I closed the door behind me, I heard the bell again, the same shell-made bell from the shack, though I was nowhere near it. A single toll, long and low, as though struck from inside my own chest. October the 15th. I woke to find water on the floorboards. Not spilled, seeping. Salt crusts the legs of the desk now. My boots are damp inside. The innkeeper remains unseen, though I hear him now at night. Slow movements, deep groans of wood, as if the house rearranges itself in darkness. The other rooms may be occupied. I do not know, I do not ask. I stepped outside only briefly. The fog is no longer white, but a greenish grey, and it carries shapes, not solid, but persistent, like outlines burned into old film. I saw one stretch across the alleyway, tall and bent, with limbs too long for its frame. It did not move, but it leaned, as though listening. When I blinked, it was gone. I think I will not leave the building again. Not until I must. October the 16th. The book speaks now. Not in words, not quite, but in pulses, impressions, swells of thought, not my own. It guides my hand when I write, and sometimes I find whole sentences beneath my pen I do not remember composing. This no longer disturbs me. It feels inevitable. I believe the town is alive, not in the poetic sense, but in the literal. Its structures are organs. The fog is breath. The sea is a circulatory system too vast to map. And the people, if they are people still, are vessels of a deeper will. They move with the tide, not of water, but of intention. I no longer count myself separate from them. October the 17th. Last night, I followed the sound again. Not the knocking, which has ceased entirely, but a rhythm that is not noise, but invitation. It led me back to the shack above the bay, though I arrived by a path I had never seen, through grasses slick with dew that shimmered under a sky with no stars. Inside, the bell hung still, but beneath it, the floor had opened, not torn or broken, parted, as though the boards had been taught to withdraw. There was a staircase, narrow and dripping, spiraling downward into darkness that pulsed with the color of kelp and rust. I did not descend. Not yet. I only stood above it, listening. The sound from below was not breathing. It was waiting, and I think I was expected. October the 18th. I descended. I do not remember making the decision. I recall only the moment my foot touched the first step, slick, narrow, and cold, and the silence that bloomed around me like something thick and sentient above. The sea wind ceased. The world narrowed to the tunnel, and I went down. The air grew heavy with each step, not with dust or damp, but with a pressure I felt more in my bones than in my lungs. The stairs spiraled, not with uniform logic, but in great uneven arcs, as though the space through which I moved refused standard geometry. Once or twice, I thought I glimpsed the shack's structure far above, seen from a skewed perspective, as if I were circling beneath and around it. At once, there were carvings on the walls, not etched, but grown, as though the rock itself had pushed up runes from its depths. Some glowed faintly in hues I cannot name, colors not of the visible spectrum, but of memory, or dream, or pressure on the eyes. I traced one symbol with my hand and felt it twitch beneath my fingers, like warm coral. The staircase ended abruptly. At the edge of water, it stretched out in all directions, black and absolute, its surface like oil, unbroken by ripple or reflection. A stone walkway continued over it, thin, cracked, and arching toward a faint structure in the distance. A platform, an altar, a gathering place. I could not tell. I walked forward, and the sea did not move. October the 19th, I returned, soaked at the tavern door was unlocked, though I had no memory of turning the key. My room awaited, undisturbed, but for the smell stronger now, a mixture of algae, salt, and a sweetness that borders on rot. My boots left prints that shimmered for hours before fading, not drying, fading, as if the water was never truly water at all. I found the charm turned on its side. Its spiral now extended beyond its surface, as though carved into the wood of the desk itself. The book lay open to a new page I had never seen, showing a man stepping from a stairwell into a submerged chamber filled with impossible architecture, arches that folded inward, spires pointed down, and creatures suspended in columns of water, their eyes closed, their mouths singing. One of the creatures resembled me, October the 20th. Time has become unmower. The clocks in the town no longer agree. Even the one above the tavern hearth runs backward now, or in stutters. The fog seeps indoors, not as vapor but as presence, hanging low like a veil between rooms. I walked into the corridor this morning and found myself outside, though the door behind me was still closed. I feel watched constantly, but not by anything. Near, the gaze comes from beneath, from a depth I cannot measure, from something vast and resting, not asleep but merely waiting for its moment. Its attention is not malicious, it is indifferent. That is the part that undoes me. Even fear is too warm for this. October the 21st, I returned to the chamber. The path was shorter now, though I do not think the distance changed, only the way I moved through it. As though the logic of travel has surrendered, the platform in the dark sea has a name now. It whispered itself into my mind before I arrived. Vrethko, though I do not know what language that is, or if it is a language at all. It feels not spoken, but remembered. There were figures there, waiting, though I could not see them directly. They existed at the edge of my perception, like stains behind the eye. They did not move, and yet I knew they welcomed me. In the center of the platform was a pool. It was not water, it was a membrane, trembling faintly, holding something beneath. I stood over it and felt something rise, not in the pool, but in me. I did not step forward, not yet. October the 22nd, something followed me back. I do not mean metaphorically, and I do not mean a person. It is a sound, or a silence made audible like a low, endless inhalation, coiling around the rafters and along the pipes. The walls of the tavern sweat at night. The wood warps inward, as though yearning towards some pressure in the sea. I hear creaking beneath. My bed that is not the foundation. Sometimes it smells of stone, sometimes of ink, sometimes of something I remember from a room that has never existed. I can no longer close the mirror. It shows not my reflection now, but the stairwell, as though it remembers where I've gone. The deeper I descend, the more it watches. October the 23rd. Today I found a new mark on my shoulder. Not a wound, but a shape in the skin, like a scar with no injury. It mirrors one of the glyphs from the platform. I have no memory of pain, only of pressure, as though a hand had rested there in sleep. The townsfolk, what few I still see, have begun to nod when they pass me. Their silence is not empty. It is a recognition. I suspect they have all descended at some point, though I do not think any of them returned in full. Their eyes reflect too much light. October the 24th. I stood at the edge of the pool again. The surface rippled once. I saw a face in it, not mine. Not quite. A version of me, perhaps, shaped by depth and pressure, hollow-eyed and open-mouthed, as though still screaming from some distant drowning. It raised its hand in greeting, and the gesture felt familiar. I think the pool is not a barrier. I think it is an invitation, and soon I will answer. October the 25th. The people have begun to gather at dusk. They move through the streets without words, their forms draped in soaked cloth, sea glass woven into the hems, fish bones stitched where buttons once were. Their movements are slow, not hesitant, but reverent, as though each step draws them closer to something vast and long-awaited. I followed them from a distance, hidden in shadow, though I suspect I was never truly unseen. They wound their way towards the northern bluff, where the cliff crumbles into the sea, and where the old church now stands, hollow and reeking of salt. They entered through its doors, and I remained outside, watching the windows flicker with green-blue. Light, not flame, but something deeper, as though the very air shimmered with memories not my own. I heard no hymns, only a sound like the deep murmur of the ocean filtered through human lungs, a prayer that does not rise but descends. They worship something beneath. October the 26th. I spent the morning deciphering new pages of the book. Its ink no longer behaves like ink. Some of the symbols now fade or appear only in certain light or under breath. A few lines disappear unless I submerge the page in salt water. There is a name that repeats, Thalakan, sometimes paired with other terms, the sleeper beneath the threshold, the mouth of the deep gate, that which watches without eyes. I feel it resonate when I speak it aloud, as though I echo something that was spoken long before language. The book describes a process, not sacrifice, not quite a joining, an unmooring of form. The body does not die. It is recalled, reshaped, by currents far older than flesh. It is not death that the cult offers, it is clarity, reversal, memory returned to its true shape. I should be horrified, instead. I feel welcome. October the 27th. They allowed me to attend. There was no invitation, no summons. I simply walked toward the church at the hour of fog-thick twilight, and this time the doors opened before me. The inside has changed. There are no pews, only salt-crusted stone arranged in concentric rings around a central basin filled with water so black it reflects nothing. The floor slopes gently downward, as if to offer the entire structure to whatever lies below. Around the basin stood the faithful. None spoke. Their heads were bowed, their hands held palm up, webbing barely visible between their fingers. Some bore gills, not fresh wounds, but matured organs. Others had translucent patches of skin, faintly illuminated from within by a cold green glow. I was neither greeted nor questioned. One of them stepped aside, and I took their place in the circle. A sound began, not from mouths, but from the water in the basin. It pulsed, rhythmic and low, and my chest ached with each beat, as though it were not sound at all, but pressure from the depths, transmitted through blood. A voice, many voices, rose from beneath, not in English, not even in thought, but in a way that reached my marrow. We do not rise, you descend. You remember what you were before the sky. I collapsed to my knees, though no one touched me. The others did not move. I think they were weeping, though their tears were not water. October the 28th. I cannot tell if I dream anymore, or if waking has become a form of deeper sleep. Last night I saw the ocean part, not in a storm, not with violence, but gently, like the drawing aside of a curtain. Beneath the surface were cities, towers of bone and coral, lightless domes pulsating like hearts. Through their streets moved shapes too large to belong on land, but too graceful to be beasts. They sang through gesture. They did not speak, and yet they named me. I have begun to feel the changes in my body. My breathing is different now. I can hold my breath longer. My skin itches when dry, and the mark on my shoulder has begun to pulse faintly when I approach the shore. I do not fear it. I believe it is not transformation, but restoration. October the 29th. Today they called me Kelthan, the one who returns. It was whispered by a woman, whose face had split subtly along her neck, gills fluttering as she inhaled the scent of the sea. She reached out and touched my forehead with 2 fingers, both faintly scaled, and I felt warmth, like sunlight beneath water. The old man from the grocer's stall was there, too, but his legs have fused now into something more serpentine. Wrapped in oilcloth, he did not speak. He only nodded. And I understood that he had waited years, perhaps decades, for the signs I now carry. They say the deep gods do not sleep in the way we understand. They dwell in time, not pass through it. The Lacan is not coming. Has always been, and we are the ones who left. The cult is not a religion. It is a remembrance. October the 30th. The book's last page has appeared. I cannot read it, not fully. Its script is fluid, moving, as though written in strands of kelp drifting in tide. But I feel what it means. It speaks of an opening, a convergence, not a gate, but a vein, through which thought and form may pass in both directions. Tomorrow, they will descend again, not in ritual, but in procession, and I will go with them. There is no fear left in me, only tide. October the 31st, we gathered at the cliffs before dawn. There was no sky, only a void of thick grey cloud that breathed with the slow rhythm of the sea. The town behind us did not sleep. I could feel it watching through its shuttered windows and half-collapsed roofs, through the warped glass of silent rooms and salt-slick chimneys. The procession moved as one, not hurried, not solemn, but inevitable. No words were spoken, no fire was carried. The faithful needed neither. They wore no masks now. What they are becoming, what they have always been, no longer needs hiding. Their forms glistened in the fog. Some had already shed the symmetry of the human frame. Others walked with bare webbed feet that made no sound on the stones. Their eyes reflected no light. I walked among them at the foot of the cliff, where the land gives way to jagged stone and brine. The tide had drawn back. further than I had ever seen, not by nature's hand, but by command. The sea had parted. What lay beyond was not shoreline, but passage. November the 1st. I do not know how to mark time here. We descended through a canyon of exposed reef, its walls lined with fossilized ribs and barnacle-covered obelisks. The water should have returned by now, but it waits. It holds its breath for us. We passed beneath arches grown of coral bone, through doorways sculpted by pressure and prayer, and then we entered the chamber. It is not a temple, it is a womb. A vast hollow beneath the seabed, filled with bioluminescent haze and the slow pulse of distant movement. The walls are inscribed with glyphs, too ancient to be read. They speak directly to the blood. Shapes move, above, behind, within, seen through layers of shifting translucence, like organs behind flesh. This place was not made. It formed, and it remembers us. They led me to the center, where a pool waits deeper than the ocean, still as thought. Here, beneath the world, I was asked nothing, only welcomed. November the 2nd. I am no longer certain which thoughts are mine. They flow now in many directions, like tide around pillars. I recall memories I never lived. I see births beneath black water, rituals performed in mouths of underwater caves, voices rising in a tongue shaped not by lungs, but by currents. A Khan is not a god as men understand gods. He is not being, but a network, a vast intelligence embedded in the ocean's memory, pulsing through creatures, places, tides. The cult is not its servant. It is its conduit. We are vessels for remembrance. The transformation is gentle but constant. My skin cools in the presence of salt. My joints ache in dry air. I no longer blink as I once did. Sometimes in silence, I hear the deep frequency of the source, a sound that is less vibration than gravity, and it soothes me. November the 3rd. Today I was shown the reliquary of those who returned. It is not a tomb. It is a chamber of convergence, filled with the preserved forms of those who walked the spiral path, and became something beyond choice. Their bodies lie suspended in columns of thick, green fluid, limbs gently curling and uncurling as if in dream. Some still resemble humanity, others no longer try. Their eyes are always open. When I stood before them, I felt no dread, only kinship. They are not dead. They are distributed across time, across thought. Their flesh remains here, but their minds drift through the liquid network of Thalakan, a current deeper than any ocean. I was told I will join them soon, not in sleep, but in Synchron. November the 4th. I remember now not who I was, that name, that face are already lost, but what I came from, before cities, before language, when flesh had not yet hardened into form, and minds bloomed in warmth beneath the continental shelves. I remember the songs we sang through the motion of tentacles, the way our thoughts spread like ripples through a field of coral, the long silence before the land came alive with noise and forgetting. We went down to preserve ourselves. We let the sea close over us like eyelids. Now we open them again. November the 5th. There are no more days. The spiral is complete. I stood today at the center of the chamber, the pool below me vibrating with slow thunder. The faithful surrounded. Me in the ancient pattern, not to bear witness, but to join, to harmonize with the act of return. I stepped into the pool. There was no cold, no resistance, only immersion. The water entered me, not just my lungs, but my mind, my marrow. the spaces between my thoughts. I felt my form unravel, not dissolve, but unweave. What I had called my body bent gently to the tide. My skin grew, thin, then translucent. My bones softened. I was not consumed. I was translated. I saw Thalakan, not a figure, a presence, a structure of thought so vast it cannot speak, only become. I understood nothing, and that was understanding. Then I sank. Some time after, water does not measure time, but the shape of silence tells me I have changed. I try to begin this entry with a name, but no name remains, only residue, something like shape, but softer, like foam. The bones are gone, the cage dissolved. Gently, what remains moves with the tide. I remember walking. I remember the sharp edges of the world, the dryness of thought, the ache of a mind bound in angles. Now thought is liquid. Now silence has taste. I write, though I do not write. I record, I pulse. This is memory. This is witness. The time between pressure and silt. There are others here. Some drift. Some sing. Some remember older tides. I move among them, not as self, but as current. Once, I was alone. Now, I am a channel. The glyphs I traced in the book grow along my inner skin. They are not words. They are permissions. We do not speak aloud. We vibrate. A shared pulse. A low resonance. Thalakan hears, not as ear, but as presence. He is not God. He is weight. He is pattern. He is the warmth that forgets you. The pulse before dimming. The chamber breathes. Its walls expand and contract like gills. I nest within the relic cavity of the temple core around me. The converged rest in layers, wrapped in ribbons of algae taut and skin memory. They do not sleep. They soften. They open like deep mollusks. We shed identities like scales above us. The town dries. The people there still remember the surface way. They speak in names. They suffer years. We watch them in stillness, like a tide remembering a footprint. When it is time, they too will be gathered. Some will come willingly. Others will be broken open and poured. When the deep opens, I dream a spiral, not of stone, but of pressure. A pattern traced in cells and echoes at the center. Not light, not dark, but density. Thought packed so tightly it becomes song dot. This is where Thalakan dreams from. Not above, not below, but within. Within salt, within hunger, within mind. He is not a presence among us. He is what we become when shape is surrendered. We do not worship, we participate. We do not kneel. We dissolve. No date, only motion. I remember you, not name, not face. The way you feared the silence. The way you held onto thought like breath. I remember how the ink trembled, how the bell swung in no wind, how your hand moved before understanding. I remember your last word before the pool, not spoken but shaped. Yes, you were not wrong. To come here, you are not gone. You were distributed, and now, through me, you write again.